Blog Talk Radio.
Hi, and welcome to MindShifter Radio with Dr. Michael Ryce, the Forgiveness Doctor. And before I turn it over to him, the call-in number is 646-200-4169. And call in with your questions. Michael.
Good morning, everybody, or actually good afternoon. I guess it's afternoon already. The day flies by when anticipating doing this show every day. It's a delight to be here on MindShifters Radio and to be sharing the ancient Aramaic technology of forgiveness with each and every one of you is just an awesome blessing in my life. And I acknowledge and thank Jeannie for her part in supporting and making this happen. Her technological know-how is an important key to us being able to do this because she's running the control panel for us to do this radio show. And so, Jeannie, are there any questions up or any calls in at this moment?
No, not yet.
All right. Well, then, my guidance for today was to talk about what in this work we call blockage of truth. And the minute that, in the last few shows we've talked about denial and the dissociated mind, and the minute that we decide we don't want to be responsible for our lives, what happens is that we hide from ourselves that which we don't want to deal with. That's the dissociated mind. And when we step into that, what happens is that we end up losing access to information that is urgent for us to have. And so when you recognize that there's this loss of information, when the mind does not have access to all of the information that it has about any particular issue or situation in our lives, there's a mind malfunction. And the mind malfunction is always indicated by any presence of either hostility or fear. Hostility or fear is an indicator that we're functioning out of a mind that isn't working properly, and that there's a part of ourselves that is from the dissociated mind impacting the way we see the world, distorting the way we see the world, and blocking our ability to see truth. Now, obviously, if one has a mind malfunction where there's blockage of truth, then they're not going to be quite as functional as the person who has full access to truth and access to all the data and all the information available in the mind and accurate access. So there's an antidote that we've developed in this work for blockage of truth. And when you tie into and start to utilize that antidote, what happens is you start to see things that previously were invisible. And things that were distorted all of a sudden clear up. So the antidote for blockage of truth is love of truth. I love what Winston Churchill says about truth. He says, most people, if they bumped into truth on the street, would get up and brush themselves off and rush away. That's how little interest most people have in truth. Most people have an interest in finding somebody else the problem in their lives, somebody else is the guilty party, somebody else did it to them, and they are innocent victims. I would offer there are no innocent victims, there are only volunteers. And the way that we volunteer is to enter into blockage of truth. Now, there'll be many people who will object to that with a comment that says something like, well, what about the little child that's victimized? Well, if you look at the little child that is victimized, what you'll find is they were the inheritors of a mind that lived in blockage of truth. And so we human beings function as creators and bring about what happens in our world. And whether we are conscious of that process or not is irrelevant. That's the way it works. Whether you like it or not, that's the way it works. And until you're willing to come into contact with those hidden parts of your mind and clean them out, what will happen is they'll run your life. In the ancient teachings, you'll remember they said, take care of the heart, for out of it are the issues in life. And that word heart is something we couldn't translate from the Aramaic until just a few decades ago when the unconscious was rediscovered. And so the heart is a code word for the unconscious or the dissociated mind. And so what they were saying in essence was, take care of your unconscious. Take care of what you've tried to hide from yourself. Now, most people will say when they start to confront their own unconscious dynamics or they're confronted with that, they'll say, well, that couldn't possibly be true about me because if that were true about me, I'd know it. It's like, excuse me? That's why they call it the unconscious. You don't know it. You're not in touch with it. Your mind is malfunctioning. Everybody in town can see it. When we go into denial and we dissociate from a part of our minds, that dissociated part of our minds hangs right out there on our sleeve. We wear it on our sleeve. Everybody in town knows about it, except us. And the idea of this work is to come back into relationship with our hearts, with the dissociated mind, and clean out what doesn't belong. Love of truth is a major tool, major key to doing that. And when you love truth enough to see that, if you've been through a particular painful reality 87 different times with 42 different people, and you were the only one that was there every time, then you start to see that there's a part of your mind that's in need of repair. However, and somebody will tell another person, gee, you've got this going on and you could just fix it, but you know something? You can't function out of brain cells you don't have. You've got to have content that guides you into seeing the value of living in love of truth compared to seeing the value of being in blockage of truth. Because the person who's in blockage of truth, they've got their victimhood status. Last night in our workshop, I asked the question, how many have ever found themselves in a situation where, or found themselves at an organ recital, and that organ recital not being anything to do with a musical instrument, but rather where a group of people get together to talk about who's had the last organ removed and who's having the next organ removed, and the identity wrapped up in mine was the worst the doctor has ever seen. Our diseases come from our dissociated mind. Our traumas come from our dissociated mind. And when we stop buying into the benefits of that, being the innocent victim and being able to hold yourself up as a victim, then you start to clean up those parts of your mind. And everything turns around and everything changes. So we want to move into that. But you've got to have the brain cells to be able to do it. And I use an example of, and when I talk in this work about building brain cells, I'm not talking about building new physical structure. I'm talking about storing data and information that allows you to see things that you previously couldn't see. In the ancient Aramaic, it was said like this: the teaching was only for those who had the eyes to see and the ears to hear. Now, obviously, probably pretty much everybody had what we call physical eyes and physical ears. So when it was said you had to have the eyes to see and the ears to hear, it wasn't about the physical eyes and ears. It was saying that you had to have the content and brain cells to comprehend what you were facing and to do something different than what you've always done. And I like to use an example of, let's imagine we've got a dog, and we bring it in the house, and we set down on the floor 2 plates. And in one of those plates, we put a pound of hamburger. On the other plate, we put an ounce of gold. And the dog comes in the room. Now, the dog obviously has a choice. The dog could choose the gold. But we all know that 100% of the dogs, 100% of the time, is going to choose the hamburger. If it had the brain cells to understand, like if we walked in and we were offered a pound of hamburger and an ounce of gold, there are none of us that would even conceive of touching the hamburger. We'd take the ounce of gold, and if we wanted a hamburger, we'll buy 500 pounds of it. But 100% of the dogs will take the hamburger 100% of the time. Why? Because they don't have the brain cells to recognize the value of the alternative. If our bloodline has taught us, and we've got lots of brain cells for the value of victimhood and the value of, being able to whine and cry and be in pain and trauma is greater than the value of taking responsibility and changing your life, then one can't make that out of choice, just any more than the dog could choose the ounce of gold. If you could help the dog to build the brain cells for choosing the ounce of gold, the dog would take the ounce of gold and go out and buy 500 pounds of hamburger or whatever. I don't know I'm vegetarian. I don't know what the price of hamburger is these days, but whatever it is. And what we're here to do with this radio show 5 days a week and with our website, whyagain.com, is we're here to help you to build the brain cells. to choose higher and higher and higher and higher alternatives. Oftentimes in our bloodlines, we've been structured, and our bloodlines have been structured through hostility and fear, and we've got lots of brain cells for that. We see that everywhere. And as long as that's what we have, then when the stress is up and the chips are down, that's what's going to take over our minds. You know, if you take a lemon and you squeeze the lemon, you know, if you don't squeeze the lemon, you look at the lemon and you go, I wonder what that is. I've never seen one before. I don't know what's inside of it. But if you squeeze the lemon, what's inside of it comes out. And it's precisely the same with us as human beings. When life squeezes us, when the stress is up and the chips are down, the gut level stuff comes out. And if it's based in hostility or fear, we're stuck in blockage of truth, we're in a mind malfunction. We want to support you in building the brain cells, but doing something different. Choosing to live an actual human life, which I offer, is the presence of love and functioning out of that.
Michael, we have a caller. We have a caller here. So 417-239, you're on.
Hello, Michael. I'm in Missouri, and my name is Joanna, and I'm sitting in the cold.
Hello, Joanna.
Yes. I'm sitting in the cold snow, and I don't really resent being here, but I find myself putting together a program about growing food, and I'm finding myself trying to take responsibility among beings who do not want to take responsibility. So how would you clarify that? I have worked a long time.
I hear you. In the ancient teachings, there was a fellow who came up with a really awesome statement. And what he said, his name was Shakespeare, was he said, "My words fly up and my thoughts remain below." Which means that if we've got some unconsciousness around something, it will reflect in our words, but the tendency will be to be unconscious of those words. And so one of the first things that I do, Joanna, is I always listen to people's words very carefully. And what happens is you don't say words that you don't have brain cells firing for. You know, in order to say something, there have to be brain cells firing with that data in it. And so let's use an example. Let's imagine that today I'm going to go to nice, icy, cold, freezing Missouri from 72. It's actually chilly here today. It's only about 72. I'm not out in the pool today doing the show. But imagine I decide I'm going to fly to Missouri. And let's say, Joanna, that we had a chat, and would there be any reason for me to say to you, well, I'm not going to China today, if what we're planning to do is to go to Missouri? What would be the only reason I'd say I'm not going to China? Because firing somewhere in brain cells is the idea of going to China. So I'd invite you, the first piece of work you might want to look at as you're there in the icy cold is to listen to your verbiage. And what you said is, I don't have any resentment about that. And you might find, if you did some forgiveness work, you know, that idea of resentment says, I'm in denial of it, and my words fly up, my thoughts remain below. What's in brain cells about being in the icy cold is some resentment. And that's how the dissociated mind works. It always works its words into the conversation, but we do it through denial. So, well, I don't have resentment, but I wouldn't speak about not having resentment unless those brain cells were firing. And what I'd suggest, Joanna, is that you start off by going to the website, whyagain.com. Actually, I realized in our last chat you don't have access to a computer. So what I will do is I will send you some worksheets and some information. And the forgiveness process that we've been able to glean from the ancient Aramaic language is about how to get in touch with and clear out the energies that are in that dissociated mind. Because as long as we deny and dissociate from something, that which underlies is in that dissociated mind is what governs our perception and our behavior. And so to come back into direct relationship with that dissociated mind becomes one of the keys to healing and changing the dynamics. So that would be the first piece of work that I'd look at. And then the next piece of work would be to look at why is there a part of me that feels like I shouldn't be supported, that I should surround myself with people who choose not to be responsible? And why are they the people that I'm drawing instead of people who want to truly support and want to really move forward? And as you look at that and do some worksheets around that, you'll find some parts of you perhaps that where you don't support yourself. And so these people are reflecting to you, when they said take care of the heart, they're saying whatever we've dissociated from is what draws or brings somebody into us. I had the privilege about 30-some or so years ago doing some work with a fellow named Marcel Vogel, who was a 23-year senior scientist from IBM. And Marcel had the instrumentation in the laboratory with which to take a picture of the high-energy waves that leave the mind when we think a thought. Literally, those energetic waves resonate or draw somebody in who wants to play off of our unconscious dynamics. And that's as it should be, because that person then gives us the opportunity to take that dissociated part of the mind, the part that I'm blocking out of awareness, bring it forward to awareness, and remove it. And removing that is what forgiveness is about. The Greeks translated the Aramaic teachings, and they turned forgiveness into, well, I'll let you off the hook for the terrible thing you've done to me and for all this pain you've caused that's going on inside of me. But the truth is, if I've got pain going on inside of me, it's because I have pain going on inside of me. And I can let somebody else off the hook till the cows come home. That's not going to change the pain that's inside of me. What is going to change the pain is when I actively use the tool of forgiveness. I go in and do my work, and I let myself come back into direct relationship with that hidden part of my mind. And as I do, I change literally the frequencies that are sitting there. And when I change the frequencies that are there, I change the energetic waves that radiate out from me, and all of a sudden I start drawing a different quality of person, a different kind of person. But as long as I point the finger at them and it's their fault, and I blame them, and I forgive them, that is, I let them off the hook, I've done a Greek act of pardoning, which has nothing to do with forgiveness. And what we're here to reestablish on planet Earth is the actual original teaching on forgiveness, where people know that if they're in some sort of pain or turmoil, if life has squeezed them and what comes out is pain or turmoil, that there's something that they're dissociated from, something they're blocking, and to love truth enough to go, there must be a part of me that I'm blocking. I think I'll let myself access that part and change it through forgiveness. And that's the worksheet process that we've developed called reality management. And I will get, I believe I have your address, I will get a package of information off to you within the next day or so.
That's marvelous. I congratulate you on the work. Pardon me?
Any other thoughts around that, Joanna? Any other questions? I mean, you're right on track with it.
Well, I guess I'm really quite mad at myself for having gotten myself in the position that I'm in, to be honest with you. And I certainly am willing, not denying it, and I'm trying to take responsibility for it, trying to use your words. But, no, I don't like being here. I don't like being in the snow, and I don't like the people that seem to be coming into my world. I'm trying to get myself in a better situation. But I'm also trying to be responsible enough to play the hand that I've been given at this point, and to play it out well.
Yeah. Well, when you go into resentment towards self, anger towards self, what happens is you violated the first law, and when we violate the laws, that tends to remove us from our human expression. One of the first questions we ask in our workshops, Jeannie usually opens the Why Is This Happening to Me Again workshop, and asks the question, how many have ever held a newborn child? And then ask people to put the essence of that newborn child into a single word. And whatever culture we ask that question on the planet, the answer is always some variation on the theme of love. That's what you are. And in the ancient teachings, when the man named Yeshua said the first law was love God, neighbor, and self, he was saying that we need to maintain a human life in the presence of our trials. And when we fall into resentment or anger towards self, we give up our human lives to fall into that resentment and anger. And so the first order of business is that as long as there's resentment and anger towards self, then I'm literally, as Marcel Vogel would show us in the laboratory, I'm literally setting up a high-energy wave that calls out and says, hey, world, I deserve people who will be angry and bitter toward me. Are there any volunteers? And if there's anybody in town who can play off of that energy, which I'm now wearing on my sleeve, guess who's coming to dinner? They're going to show up. They're going to come into my life. And they're going to show me exactly what it is that I'm holding on to. And I will feel the effects of that. And we've kind of developed a test, Joanne, that tells people whether or not something they're feeling is theirs or not. It's kind of a complex sort of test to apply, but a little bit of practice, and it works really well. A way to tell whether or not something you're feeling is yours or not is, are you feeling it? And as you recognize that you're feeling it, you recognize there's something in you that's unlike your human life. And I'd offer the higher purpose of being here at this point is for each of us to reclaim our human lives by giving up what is unlike our human lives and covering up our human lives. The being the newborn that you were, that somebody held you in their hands and said, what an awesome presence of love, is still alive and well, but when you have anger toward yourself, it tends to cover that up. And the goal of our work is to support every mind, heart, and being on the planet totally and completely reclaiming their human lives by forgiving every hostility, every fear, every grief, every pain, every trauma, literally from all the generations. You know, when they said, look to the lives of the fathers, for ours are but a shadow of theirs upon the earth. Most people don't have a human life. They're playing out of the hostilities and fears of the fathers, of the generations, and they add to them. Forgiveness is how to delete those. Forgiveness is not about letting the person who comes along and, quote, unquote, makes us angry, not forgiving them. That's pardoning, nice thing to do. But forgiveness is, if someone comes along and resonates the anger that I hold in me, I apply forgiveness to that anger, and I remove that anger from my experience. And once I've removed it in that area of my life, I've reclaimed my human life. And now I function on a whole new level. And we're looking to support every mind, heart, and being on the planet functioning on that whole new level. So I support you being able to heal that anger and actually follow the first law in regard to yourself, and that is have this absolute awesome appreciation for the fact that you're created of the active presence of love and that you live as that, whatever trials, whatever tribulations you face.
Well, okay. That's good. I think that's very sound advice, and I certainly understand it. And I think you're right on.
Awesome.
I think at this point I'm a bit of a laboratory and a test tube for the whole philosophy, and I'll take that direction, and I will certainly look at it, and I really appreciate it.
Okay, I'll get some worksheets and some instructions for the worksheet off to you.
Okay, keep up the good work.
And awesome.
Thank you for calling in,
hold the space of love for you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, Michael, we have a question out of the chat room.
Cool.
And
what's the question?
They ask, when I am confronted with a tenacious ego, which is in the I'm right and you should apologize, is it better just to give them what they want, or how would you actually deal with what's up?
Okay, so let me see if I get this clear. You have a tenacious ego that you don't want to give up.
They've run into somebody else.
I'm rephrasing. I'm just reflecting the blockage of truth.
Uh-oh, okay.
With my word. So, it's all done with smoke and mirrors. When I have a judgment about someone else, the judgment comes from my brain cells. You'll remember in Romans 2, they said, beware you who judge another, for that in which you judge another, you have been guilty of practicing. So the first order of business, before you take the speck out of your brother's eye would be to take the beam out of your own, and I would suggest that you begin to deal with your tenacious ego. Now, a tenacious ego, some people get up there and bully and they say, oh, boy, he's a real egomaniac. But you know something? It's just as awesomely large an ego to say, well, I'm so weak and helpless and I'm always a victim. That's ego. And the forgiveness work is about dismantling everything in you that is unlike the active presence of love. And again, notice that in the presence of this, which you call someone else's ego, notice in the presence of that you have some pain or trauma, and that pain or trauma is a reflection of your own dissociated state of mind. It has nothing to do with the person you're confronting. They're the resonator for it. They're the energy field that's shown up to show you that part of your mind. So the classic game that the ego plays is, I'm right, you're wrong, it's settled, why argue? And so for me to give up myself and just give them what they want is just as strong an ego trip. And so my input would be, put the pen to the paper, forgive the dissociated mind in yourself, take the beam out of your eye, and then what will happen is you will be the active presence of love for your brother, the one who you think is the one with the ego problem. And as you are the active presence of love for them, guess what's going to tend to happen? Their ego reflection is going to tend to dissolve. And that's the work. That's the power of doing your own internal work. And that's where we want to head. And if you're in the state of most minds on the earth today, in response to that answer, you're probably saying, yeah, but you don't know what they did. It's like, you know something? I don't know what they did. I don't have to know what they did. All I have to know is what your judgment is, and I know what's going on in your mind. Because the realities that come forward in the mind always come from the content of the mind. So here's this big ego out there squeezing you, and your content comes up. And so I'd offer that as you do your work, you'll be perhaps very surprised to see how the people around you shift and change. That's the way it works. That's the way it happens.
Okay, but they say they are standing in their own space as an observer, seeing this person acting out in their tenacious ego. And if there's not a feeling attached to it and you're an observer, then how do you deal with them? Do you give them what they want, or do you walk away from them, or what do you do?
Well, without knowing more of the details, the normal answer, we had a question, and I offered an answer. The normal response is going to be a yeah, but. Well, I don't have any work to do. It's all theirs. You would have, I would offer, if you didn't have a piece of work to do around this, is you would have total clarity on what to do. Your guidance would kick in, and you would know exactly what to be doing in that situation to diffuse the energy and return to human life. And the fact that you don't tells me that there's some projection here, because here's what happens when we deny and dissociate. Again, the realities that show up in my mind always tell me more about the content of my mind. When I'm sure this is a tenacious ego in front of me, I have a tenacious ego that I've denied and dissociated from. This person comes along and resonates those brain cells. Those brain cells form a body that I call them with this tenacious ego. But the tenacious ego that's showing up in the body in my mind is mine. That's my content. And I would suggest the first order of business would be to begin putting the pen to the paper. Go to whyagain.com, right-hand side of the page, the home page. You'll see a thing that says download worksheets. I would suggest that you pick up and do 5 worksheets a day between now and next Tuesday, a week. And then call back in and tell me how different the world looks to you. And I guarantee the world's going to look, and this tenacious ego is going to look totally different if you do that. Now, one of the things that often happens is that the mind says, well, you know, I've been trying for years to change situations in my life, and they just don't change. You know, it just doesn't happen. It's like I've almost given up on this because those kind of things don't change. And you know what? There is nothing unlike love that is unchangeable. There is nothing unlike love that will not dramatically change when we go inside ourselves and forgive. Everything will shift and change. However, if you don't have the tools, you can wish for it to change. You can hope that it will change. You can let them off the hook. You can let yourself off the hook, which the world calls forgiveness and has nothing to do with forgiveness. And that's not going to change anything. And I use an example of, let's imagine that I have a company where what I do is I bulldoze and get rid of parking lots. And I get a call from somebody who says, you know, I don't believe that you can get rid of a parking lot. I said, well, what do you mean? I do it all the time. Oh, I don't think it's possible because we've been trying. My company, we have a parking lot out in front of our building, and we've been trying for 20 years to get rid of our parking lot, and it hasn't worked. I said, well, what do you mean you've been trying for 20? Well, we go out every morning. We have 5 employees, and we go out every morning and work on getting rid of that parking lot. And I say, well, what is it that you do? Well, we go out with toothpicks every morning, and we've been doing this 8 hours a day, 5 of us, for 20 years, and the parking lot's still there, so I know you can't get rid of a parking lot. And you know what? With toothpicks, you can't. If you don't have the tools, you can't. I guarantee you, if I send a bulldozer over, your parking lot is history this afternoon. I guarantee you, if you take this tool of forgiveness that's on our website and actually begin to use it, actually go into your own dissociated mind, which projects that the problem's out there, you will change that whole dynamic in your life. That's how it works. And it works.
So is it possible, though, sometimes to just be, like, totally present and observing somebody else being in their stuff, so you're, you know, observing what's actually going on and that they are acting like a tenacious ego or whatever, and how do you respond if you are in that space? Do you just choose to say, you know, I see you've got something up for you and I choose to go somewhere else, or, you know, how do you handle that?
Well, if I choose to go somewhere else, if I choose to run away and not take responsibility, it's guaranteed that I'm going to find somebody else to
But if you're just observing, if you're just observing it, though, and there's no emotion to it.
Yeah. Well, my input would be then what would happen would be you would have the guidance and know exactly what to do, and there wouldn't be a need to ask the question. If there's a need to ask the question, there's still some inner work to be done. That would be my input. Otherwise, living in a human life, there's an awesome line in A Course in Miracles that says, only what I have not given is missing here. And when I really totally awaken to my spiritual essence, my beingness, which is love, then I'm going to have the power, I'm going to have the guidance, I'm going to have the foresight, I'm going to have the insight to do whatever's necessary to change whatever dynamic is going on. If I don't have that, I suggest you go to the worksheet, you start putting the pen to the paper, and see what you discover. I promise you, you will discover something about yourself that you don't know yet. And that doesn't mean that in a situation that you don't have the right to choose, you know, I'm out of here. But if I'm out of here, you know, one of the things I talk about is taking the geographic cure. And why does the geographic cure never work? The geographic cure doesn't work because when you take the geographic cure, you go along. You take your whole creative self with you, and you will find a part of yourself that needs to express, and it will express, and you'll find somebody else to play it out with you. Once you recognize that, then you come out of denial, you start to own those parts of your mind, and you clean them up. And if you're seeing a tenacious ego, you got work to do, because that picture comes from the content of your mind.
Very good.
All right. Any other questions there? Any callers?
No, David's on the line.
Oh, David, come on in. You got something to say? Share with us, David?
You're on, David.
Am I really? Okay.
You are.
You are. Welcome.
Okay, I thought I had to press David is the Jeannie is, as always, is in charge, and so she has me on there without me even knowing I'm on.
Right.
It's amazing. She's a powerful woman there. It's like, oh, I better watch what I say, huh? Actually, when the comment said and the remark that Jeannie was talking about, and asking the question, well, what I do, do I leave or don't I? And of course, my first thought was all of the above, and then I thought about it because I'm often in that space. That's the purpose of doing my work, is so that I can hold the space while other people can. And as you pointed out and have taught me, Michael, is that whenever that when I'm in the space of love, then I recognize what it is that's going on with them, and that something that I've worked through it to support them in working through it. If I've done that, as you pointed out, I will intuitively know what to say and do. There's no question of it. It's when I've asked the question, what do I do, as in the Course in Miracles says, let go of the question and ask differently. And I'm finding that the more that I am able to hold that space and to do my work, then I'm continuously bringing people in for me to practice doing just that.
Right. And, whenever we want to punish, that's an indicator there's a piece of work for us to do. And people say, well, I don't want to punish them, I just want to leave. Well, if you check history, you'll find that the absolute worst punishment that one human being can do to another is to leave. It is punishment. And when you stop your denial, it's interesting, you go all the way back to the book of James where it says, stop your denial. When you stop your denial and look at the punishment and what you are not holding the space of love for, you get to do the next level of your work. And, this is a major process to become that responsible for everything that's happening in your world and everything that you see. Because what you see isn't out there. What you see is your brain's interpretation of what's out there. And your brain's interpretation is always autobiographical. It always tells you something about yourself. Stop your denial. Stop pretending that it's all somebody else and take responsibility. And the part of you that says, I want to punish by leaving, although you probably won't admit that it's a punishment thought, the punishment thought of leaving, you will then start to look at on a deeper level and start to change it. And as you do, you'll get to heal a whole other part of your mind.
Yeah, and as you pointed that out about the punishing, then at times there have been where I have left, which was in a sense a form of punishment to myself, because that just enforced it within myself that, this is what I do, and so now I've programmed that into myself to punish myself rather than to reward myself, rather than to take care of myself and to stay there in that space. I remember reading someone who had written that said, if I leave, it means that I'm going to get to do it again. and then when I found your work with it, it just reinforced that. I carried that for a while, and I understand a little better now of the whole thing about leaving. And that opens up some things for me about commitments. When you were talking about that the commitments seem to be taken so lightly in the world today with people with their integrity. And, of course, there's this whole energy that's going to be coming into integrity and ethics. And the commitments that people make, that it's so common just to break a commitment. I was writing the other day about what a commitment, when I was a child, I didn't call them commitments to my friends, and my friends didn't call them commitments to me. What they called them was promises. I promised that I'll do this. And the friends that promised and kept their promise, we were friends for life. And the ones that didn't, I didn't have that. So though that there's this word commitment, it really is a promise, and it's become almost in a form of, I like to use an analogy of going through a grocery store or going shopping, and someone's there and they're adding things up, and it's ding, 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 and they look at you, take your money, and say thank you, and they're saying thank you with just unconsciously, just as a rote way of acknowledging I've done what it is that I need to do, much like promises and commitment today.
Yeah, and leaving is one of the biggest issues on the planet. One of the things that I co-created was a thing called Laws of Living. It's, of course, we taught in the prison system that cut recidivism by 95% in the prison until the sheriff kicked it out because there was no population for him to make money from. And one of the pieces of research that we did for that was there's a fellow named General Mayer who was an Army psychiatrist back in the time of the Korean War. And they saw things happen in Korea that they had never seen happen before. Actually, you can Google Mayer's address to Congress. It's very interesting. But what happened in Korea was that they saw things that they'd never seen happen to U.S. servicemen anywhere in the world, in any war they'd ever been in. And what happened was that they actually had prison camps where they had 6,000 American soldiers and only had, I forget exactly what, 7 or 8 guards. And they were able to contain 6,000 Americans. Now, if you read the history of previous wars, it didn't matter. If they had 3 Americans, 2 of them would give their lives up for the third one to get out, and it didn't matter if they had 20 guards on those 3 men. There was a different relationship that happened previous to the Korean War, and they coined a term called brainwashing out of what happened in those prison camps. Interestingly enough, the people who did the brainwashing were graduates of American schools of social sciences that went in and for the Korean government brainwashed American prisoners of war. But one of the cases that struck me in the reports and the researching of what happened in Korea was these men were in, I guess, hooches or in little, huts, and there were 9 of them, if I remember correctly, in a hut, and one of the men had dysentery, and one of the others didn't like the fact that he had dysentery and threw him out in the snow, and the man died. This man was actually charged with and found guilty of murder. But when they asked the other 7 men in the hut why they didn't do something, they all said it was none of their business. And in essence, what they had done was they had left. They had dissociated. They had disappeared from relationship with this man who's freezing to death in the snow right outside their door. And each one of them could have done something, and they didn't. And what became clear to me in listening to General Mayer's testimony, and it was interesting because when they liberated the prison camp, the soldiers that were liberated were offered free telephone calls by the Red Cross to call home and talk to loved ones. Almost nobody made a phone call to a spouse, a lover, a friend, a child, a parent. Almost none of the soldiers did that. No phone calls home. They were given money, and of course, American soldiers are given money and liberty. What do? They go to town together and they get drunk. Almost none of them went to town, and the few that went by themselves. I believe my conclusion out of the research by General Mayer is that these social science graduates from American schools learned how to implant in those soldiers a relationship virus. And that relationship virus, when those soldiers came home, spread throughout the culture. If you think back pre-1950, there was a certain level of integrity with employer to employee and employee to employer. That's virtually gone. There was a certain level of family integrity, parent to child, child to parent. That's virtually gone. Not that there wasn't crazy stuff going on, but there was a certain level of fidelity. And fidelity has almost disappeared. And the number one issue on the planet is, if I don't like what you're doing, and I have some form of turmoil about it, and the only reason I'd want to leave is because I have some form of turmoil about it, if I choose to not be responsible, if I live in blockage of truth of my own turmoil, then what's going to happen is I'm out of here. Yes, I made a commitment to you. Yes, I said I would do this. I said I would do that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the fact is, here I am not doing it because I'm breaking what I called a commitment, a promise, that, if the stress is up and the chips are down, I had no intention of keeping in the first place. I have many people who I've worked with over the years who will acknowledge the fact that, Michael, you've been doing this for 40 years, and I've watched some of the turmoils and trials and traumas that you've been through in doing it. And they go, you just keep doing it. And here's what I know is true for me. I have a commitment, and I'm going to keep that commitment. And I'm going to put one foot in front of the other. And it doesn't matter what happens. One foot in front of the other is going to move this work forward until it's available to every mind, heart, and being on the planet. That's commitment. And most people say, yay, hey, that's really great. Let me come and join the team. And they show up. And then life starts to squeeze them. The stress is up and the chips are down, and all of a sudden their word and their commitment means zip. I'm out of here. It happens all the time. And I believe it's because of that relationship virus that was implanted, and it is commitment to integrity in relationship, commitment to fidelity in relationship, and forgiveness of those dissociated parts that run our behaviors that makes the difference.
Yeah, Michael, when I first heard that about the Korean veterans, me being a combat Vietnam veteran, that was that was difficult for me to grasp. And even today, I worked with a veterans organization, a nonprofit organization called Base Camp, and lived in Nashville, Tennessee for about 10 years. And one of the things that we recognized and we knew was that in working with the veterans, or at least from the Vietnam veterans on back, and this isn't this, at that time there were very few Gulf veterans, and certainly Iraq wasn't going on, that we could communicate with the veterans themselves much easier than we could with civil servant type. Well, not civil, what's the word I'm looking for civilians, because there was a certain conditioning, training, orientation that everyone was accustomed to going through, that understood this thing about being committed and supportive of that other individual. And there was some repercussions that if a person wasn't willing, in order to adhere to this particular code, then they just didn't fit in. And to think that there was 6 or 7 people guarding 1,000 people, it was just like, that would just have been laughed at. It's like, but there would be no way. It would have just been an overthrow with it. So it was a challenge for me to get that, and I have that relationship with a lot of veterans, in that when we communicate about it, if we give our word about it, then we're pretty adamant about following through with it.
I think that Michael's phone just went out, but hold on, and we'll get him back. Just one second.
Oh,
okay.
Well, you and I can talk, Gene. Or anyone
Sure.
else can come on and talk. Yeah. So,
there was that. Hold on, and let me get him with you. David, keep talking there for a second.
What's happening?
Oh, he's back. You disappeared.
I did. I've actually got another radio interview coming up in about 12 minutes, and the people who I'm doing that radio interview had just called in, so while David was chatting, I quickly switched over to just to see what they want.
Ah, okay.
So things are on go here. We're rock and roll. So
well,
we're going to go from this Sunday. We're going to do a workshop in Pompano Beach, sponsored by a thing called In the Rooms, which is a wonderful website for people in recovery. And so they've set up for me to do a radio interview with a fellow named John Hollis, who we'll be talking to in a few minutes on his show. And you can tap into his show through holisticlifestylesradio.com if you want to listen to our interview there. You have another question or thought there, Jean?
Well, there's a couple things. One, let me give the call number again, 646-200-4169. And we've got about 9 minutes left. Someone in the chat room, though, said that something very similar to the story you were telling about the soldier that threw the other one out and he froze to death in the snow. Something very similar to that happened in Springfield yesterday. There was a homeless man that died in the cold behind a gas station. He had gone into the gas station to get warm, and it was none of their business that he was cold, and he ended up freezing to death that night behind the gas station. And so then they come back and said in either of those cases, I think there's one thing about being aware of the situation and taking care of other people, but the question was if they were bothered then that the person was in the cold, would that have been their issue?
Yeah. Well, if you're bothered that the person is in the cold and you're not functioning from love, you're functioning from fear, do a worksheet, clean that fear out. You want to function from being all the time. But, there's a great story that a man named Yeshua told 2,000 years ago about a man who was fallen upon by robbers and was beaten almost to death. And all of the highfalutin folks in town walked past him and looked and said, not my business, not my business. I don't have anything to do with this, not my business. And there was one who was a Samaritan. And the Samaritan, in essence, in that culture, the Samaritan was kind of an outcast. You didn't deal with those people. They were outcasts. But here was a Samaritan who takes someone who's not of his own tribe, who he shouldn't give a hoot for, and he actually takes him, houses him, feeds him, dresses his wounds, leaves money at the hotel because he's got to be on his way, and says, I'll check back, and if there's anything else you need to spend, I'll take care of it. And Yeshua asked the question, who is your neighbor? And so once you recognize that everybody that you think about is your neighbor, and when you choose to function out of everyone being your neighbor, how do you withhold? How does it happen? I don't know. But yeah, if there's some form of disturbance around it, clean up the disturbance. Any form of hostility or fear that physiology can produce means that there is something in physiology that doesn't belong there. It needs to be removed. And so when you remove that, you function more and more and more consciously. And the idea is to function more deeply out of the active presence and out of the active space of love 24/7, 365. That's how we live a human life. And if we're not doing that, then we're not living a human life. Our goal with this work is to restore the active presence of human life to every mind, heart, and being on the planet. That's our work together.
This sort of reminds me of a question that was asked last night. We're doing workshops here in Fort Lauderdale, and what I'll do is wait, and I'll go over that schedule after Michael, give him a few minutes to get off early so he can get on the other show. But we were having a conversation during intermission during the workshop last night, and there was a lady that asked me to explain the difference between empathy and sympathy. And so what I explained to her, can everybody still hear me? Because Michael is off the air, and so I just wanted to make sure that with him getting off that I'm still can be heard. Can you hear me, David?
Can you hear? Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, awesome. So what I explained to her was that sympathy is like, say, for instance, you go to, a friend's house and they've had a loss and they're in all this grief and everything, and you get right down in the grief with them and, oh, poor you and all this, that you're adding energy to their grief and you're not helping them any. And so then the opposite of that, empathy, is like you stay in the space of connected being and offer them the space where they can process their grief. And so there's a difference. It's subtle, but there is a big difference there. David, do you have anything that you can add on to that one?
Well, I think you're right in alignment with it, Jeannie. It is, it goes back to what I think you were talking about earlier. When someone's stuff is up, then it's the same thing of holding the space of energy of love while this person processes through, whether it's anger or fear or hostility, and it goes in the same. It's the same principle for someone that's going through sadness, that's going through grief, that's going through a difficult time. There's no difference. It's energy. And the truth of it is that and this is what happens when we're growing up usually, that we've been taught improperly of how to handle those energies. When, there's been an association with boys don't cry, and that and so there's a sadness, or there's feelings that come up, and it's just an energy. And if they don't learn how to handle that energy, then they hold it in. And so you want to be able to do that. And the same
that
way with
holding it in like that. Could that? Go ahead. I was just going to say, holding it in like that as a guy, did you see that also kind of like crystallized in your body, like hardened your physiology even?
Oh, absolutely. That was one of the messages was to be tough. If someone were soft and gentle or kind and thoughtful, and it doesn't mean that there isn't a certain part of being masculine, because there is. There's a different physiology about it in that way, because we've taken on those physical energies. So we need to, and this is my take of what bringing that female energy, that feminine energy, into the male energy, and vice versa, that females, most of them have so many emotions that are connected, and we don't have time to get into it, about the connections in the brain between males and females, is that females have more connections between the left and the right hemisphere. So therefore they have different emotions and different feelings. And they've been taught, my projection of it is that they're supposed to be able to know how to handle all of that.
Right.
The truth of it is that they haven't been told. They've just been told, oh, you're a female, and you just do that, and you just do this. Well, if you haven't been taught how to manage that, and I think that males have this ability because they have been taught how to shut it down. It's like when there is an emergency, there is something vital that's going on. If all of a sudden what is referred to as hysteria gets there, whether it's coming from male or a female, then if they're not able to manage that and to stay focused with it and come from the true essence, then it's still disruptive. It still is harmful. To me, it's no different harmful for a man to hold it in as it is for a woman to be hysterical, as an example.
In the we've got about 1 minute, so I just want to kind of wrap that up there. So in the situation with the people being put out in the cold, and whether it was your issue or not, and I agree with what Sam's putting in the chat room, we can have compassion or empathy for the person and reach out and give a hand, and not have the pain, which is what is in sympathy. So there's a fine line difference there, but that is definitely what. We need to have compassion and empathy for others, and to act like human beings towards each other. We don't need to get into the empathy and down into the level with them, or the sympathy. We do that, then that's a worksheet issue.
Right.
So.
The compassion comes from love. When we do that, we're being compassionate.
Right. So compassion is one thing, but the having an issue about it is another. So we've got about 40 seconds, so I want to announce, thank you, David, for your assistance there. And
you're welcome.
On here Monday through Friday from 1 to 2 Eastern Time. And I wanted to announce our workshops that we have going this week in Fort Lauderdale. You can go to our website, which is www.whyagain.com, and click on travel schedule. and you can see everything that we've got scheduled right now in Fort Lauderdale. We've got the rest of this week. We're doing communication. Did you hear what I think I said tonight? Healing through relationships tomorrow night, codependence on Thursday night, and purpose, personal power, and commitment on Friday night. And then Saturday, we're doing